Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1094A, and today's date is October 6, 2016, and the title of the episode is Countries Are Now Preparing for an Economic Crisis. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, today we can see that gold was suppressed once again, and we know from the court ruling that the suppression of gold is just not by chance. We know that banks, central banks, they've been doing it for quite a while. And we can see that gold is continually being brought down. And this is an indicator that something is going to happen, most likely some type of financial event. And we're starting to hear calls from the central bankers where they want additional rules, they want additional power, they want legislation passed, and they're talking about debt restructuring or getting rid of bad loans. Now, we need to think about this for a second. Why would they be doing this at this point? Well, we realize that the world has about 152 trillion or so worth of debt, worldwide debt. This is a huge number, and they realize that this debt problem is a major problem because they don't want countries to go under, because that will show the central bank through debt collapsed a country. They need countries to barely stay afloat so they can continually give them more and more debt to keep them under control. And this is why the United States Secretary of Treasury Jack Lew, that's why he wants a restructuring now in Greece. He says the only solution to Greece's debt problems would be restructure it. He said any delays would only make the situation more difficult later on. So what he's really saying right now is there's a huge problem in Greece. Greece right now is going to go under. It's going to collapse unless the debt is restructured. This is why they're pushing for a slight debt restructuring. Not to completely wipe it out, but to allow Greece to survive. And of course, many people think like, oh, this is fantastic. They're going to let Greece survive. They're trying to help. No, they're trying to keep their system intact. They don't want to show the world that through their policies, they collapsed a country. They can't let that happen because the rest of the world, the rest of the countries are going to look at the central bank and say, whoa, wait a minute. What just happened here? You kept on piling debt and on debt, on debt, on debt on Greece, and you brought the country to its knees. And all the austerity didn't help. We don't want the same thing. And this is why they're pushing so hard. Because the world right now is suffocating from all this debt. They know there's not enough revenue out there to pay for all of this. People are losing jobs left and right. And as more and more people lose left and right and there's more austerity, where do you get the revenue to pay for the interest on this debt? Well, it's non-existent. And this is the problem they're running into. Actually, the system, the central banker system, is designed to fail. It can never, ever work in this way. And this is why they're having the problem right now. And they know eventually the system will just come down by itself, and they can't let that happen. So they need to keep the illusion alive that everything is fine. Keep people in the dark. That's what they like to do until the very last minute when the whole thing comes down. And even when it comes down, they're going to tell you everything is fine. The things that you need to worry about with government is when they make a really big deal about something, that's not the problem. It's when they're very quiet and they don't let the public know about things that aren't happening. Things that we're talking about. They never mention it. Those are the things that you need to really worry about, because everything they're blowing out of proportion is a distraction to distract you away from what's real, from what's important. I mean, right now we see initial jobless claims. They're continually manipulating this. Initial jobless claims are at the lowest level since 1973. And most people say, wow, this is amazing. Look at this. No one is claiming unemployment. Everything is great. But really what's happening is more and more people are being laid off. They're unemployed. And when you look back in time, you see the initial jobless claims. Every time they've reached low levels like this, about a couple months later, we have a major recession, depression. And when you look back in time, back to 1975, 1980, 1991, 2001, 2007, 8, we were at the lowest points in initial jobless claims. And a couple of months later, all of a sudden, the initial jobless claims shot up and we went into some type of recession. Right now, we are at the lowest point since 1973, which tells us that we are headed for a complete collapse of the system because we are already in a recession. And it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. It's not getting better. The economy is not improving. But they want us to believe that initial jobless claims, they're continually declining. How can this be when U.S. factory orders are continually declining? Retail is contracting. Corporations are laying off. Something doesn't make sense. Something doesn't fit into this model. And very interestingly, and you have to remember, back in 2013, the United States, because of budget constraints, of course, they had to let go of that department that looked at layoffs, that collected the layoff data. They just closed that department. But we know they had the money because this year, 2016, they already borrowed about $1.4 trillion. We don't know where that money actually went. Most likely not here in the United States, because we mentioned it before that we don't see any improvements throughout the United States. So we know this went to foreign governments. It went to the war. It went to many other places. But Challenger Gray & Christmas, which is a private firm, they report on what is going on in the United States and how many layoffs there are. And they announced that layoffs have jumped 38% from the August count to 44,324. And what they're saying right now is that layoffs are up. And most of them are coming from the education industry. Job losses have quadrupled to 8,671. The computer industry last month laid off about 4,152 jobs. And we see that the energy sector laid off about 59,719. So when we look at this, we see that the job cuts were around 98,733 people that were laid off. Retailers, they announced they're laying off 7,296 jobs. But they continually tell us that retail is expanding. It doesn't make sense. We see countries right now, they are preparing for this economic crisis. They're preparing for what is happening in the world. And we see the Dutch Central Bank, well, they're going to be moving their gold from Amsterdam to a former military air base. And you have to remember, the Dutch Central Bank, the Netherlands, they repatriated 122 tons of physical gold from the New York Fed. And it looks like right now they're moving it to keep it protected for security measures necessary to guard their gold. And we can see right now that countries, they are asking for their gold back. They're moving it to secret locations to keep it safe, because we can see what is happening around the world. We see an economic crisis. We see war. We see many geopolitical problems around Europe, in the United States, and the situation is deteriorating very, very quickly. And we know these central bankers, they want to take control of countries. I mean, their ultimate goal is a one-world government. And we can see the internet was signed off and moved to the UN, which is the first piece of the puzzle. We understand that Obama, central bankers, the IMF, they really wanted the TTIP, the TPP. They wanted all of that passed, but we can see that has been going nowhere. So they do have a backup trade plan, which is called CETA, that is coming out of Canada, which is pretty much a duplicate of the TTIP, the TPP. And in an attempt to keep the EU-Canada trade deal CETA on track, the European Commission has drawn up a declaration aimed at reassuring those worried by the implication of the deal. It was a 5-page document which was leaked last night and has been scrutinized by lawyers and trade experts. And we can see that these leaked documents prove that this entire deal is a toxic trade deal, just like the TTIP. And we have to remember why they want this so bad. This is why are they pushing this so hard? Because it allows them to take control of governments through the corporate court system, which through these trade deals will override governments, and it will allow them to tell governments what to do. So when we put this together, the UN has control of the internet, which is control of news that is coming out of other sources than the corporate media, because they already have control of the corporate media. The corporate media is completely controlled by the government central bankers. The internet now is going to be controlled by the UN. They need CETA or the TTIP or the TPP. They need that to control governments. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create an instance of where they can control everything through all of this. The central banks, they're trying to push the idea of getting control of the economy, more of it. And this is why they want to create new rules. This is why they want legislation. This is why they're pushing so hard to convince everyone that they need more power. And this is why we're going to see the first phase of the collapse, because they need this. Because think about it. If they have control of the economy and more control comes to them, they control pretty much all of the economy, all aspects. Then if you have the trade deal on a level of making decisions and laws, they have that covered. Then if you look at the corporate media, they already have that covered. And if you look at the internet, where there's alternative media and other news sources, they have that controlled. So when you look at this, they actually will have control, and it will be a one world type of government where they're calling the shots. And we see right now that they are pushing very hard and trying to get countries to do what they want. I mean, why is the Department of Justice right now pushing a fine that have to do with mortgage-backed securities from 2008? Why are they pushing this so hard 8 years later? Well, we know that Germany is moving closer to Russia. They wanted to remove the sanctions. Maybe they'll step away from the EU. And it looks like they're using this to bring the European countries back in line. And we can see there's a lot of trial balloons out there in regards to Deutsche Bank, where the German government is holding discreet talks with Deutsche Bank. A new report out there said that German companies are ready to willing to offer capital injections into Deutsche Bank to try to save it. And we see right now the EU, the IMF, well, they're proposing a taxpayer-funded derivative bailout to bail out Deutsche Bank, where the people will pony up a certain amount of money to save Deutsche Bank. So we see many different things happening all at once. We have the IMF, the EU looking for new rules to maybe get rid of bad loans. They're talking about taxing the people to save the bank, because it looks like the bank right now, the bailout will not go, because if they bail out Deutsche Bank, then we know the rest of the banks through the EU are going to say, something we need a bailout too. If they do a bail-in, this is just going to destroy Deutsche Bank at this time, because the whole thing will just come crumbling down. So right now what we're seeing is the U.S. government central bankers are trying to push Europe back in line, and if they do not get in line, they are ready and willing to do a controlled collapse of the system. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.